Welcome to the Reclaim Leader podcast. I'm Jason Tucker.
And I'm Jesse Skiffington.
We're two pastors in the trenches who are passionate about church health for greater gospel impact.
We share the ups and downs of ministry, strategies that worked for us,
and some that didn't.
Best practices and practical tools for church leadership.
The goal, to help all of our churches flourish. Let's get started.
See another sunrise, sing a little song.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Reclaim Leader podcast. Jesse, it is a beautiful pre-snow weather in real time. Apparently Snowmageddon is coming to the Northeast, so we are all hunkering down, which I never really knew exactly what that meant, but we got to buy bread, milk, and ice and ice melt. You know, that's kind of what you do.
Important things to have on hand if Snowmageddon really is coming, but
who knows? It's probably going to be flurries.
It's fun to get a good snow every so often, as long as that good snow then goes away shortly thereafter and doesn't stay for
exactly right. Well, it's going to be like 50 degrees tomorrow. So
right. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on. But anyway, it's good to be back. And as we were talking before we hit record, it's like being in the trenches in ministry with you, our listeners, is real. You know, we had a week where we've had a lot of meetings. We had our elder board meeting. We had a stewardship meeting. It's like all these different systems and teams. It's like once we hit January, do you know what I think it is? This is why January is sneaky busy for me.
Yeah.
Because I don't have the discipline in November to make sure January isn't great. Because here's what happens.
That's right.
We're so wrapped up in the holidays.
Yeah.
It's all like, we'll get back to that in January.
Yes.
Hey,
table that.
New year.
Yeah. We had one of this crazy session meetings, which is our leadership team in Presbyterian land, and where we didn't have a quorum because people were sick. A couple of people were traveling. And it's like, that is a rare occurrence. So we couldn't get any business done. And I was just like, well, then let's just all go home. But we ended up having a really good chat. But yeah, January is a crazy one to kind of wrangle sometimes. And we just get slammed right into the new year. But anyway, we're making progress, I hope. And hopefully you're keeping your head up out there too, and whatever it is that you're doing, and new sermon series. And guess what? Easter is almost here, Jason. I mean, and then it'll be Christmas again. So, you know, let's get after it.
Thanks. That's super encouraging, Jesse.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope you feel encouraged about that. And I know you're rooting for the Seahawks right now, so I appreciate that as well. And who knows what's going on in real time with that. But it's been a fun little community run for us out here with the Hawks kind of coming back into form
They look good, man. They look really good.
We'll see. We'll see if this ages well or not, because the NFC Championship game will be over, I think, by the time this airs.
Yeah.
We'll see. I'm hopeful.
We're going to see if this ages well.
Yeah,
I predict they're going to win.
Oh, good.
All
Well,
right.
today we're getting back into some of the themes and topics in your book. And we started that last week, which was really fun just to get to hear a little bit about the process of writing and what was kind of behind your desire to put something like this out there into the world. And so thanks for being willing to kind of share your process with us, but then also to get into some of the content as we're thinking about how do we help our churches to flourish and to adapt and to keep moving forward toward the mission that God is calling us to. So really looking forward to diving into this again. And we're going to be in part 2 of what I think will probably become a 4-part set of episodes here. So looking forward to this one. And before we dive into the discern part of your book, and we're thinking about how do we speak their language and how do we begin to translate the gospel in a way that reaches to the younger generations, let's go back and just revisit a little bit of where we were last week. So if you missed it, go back and listen. But here's kind of just a super high level recap. We started with those 4 Ds that kind of create the framework for this process. And so remind us of what those 4 Ds are and just a quick one-liner about each of those.
Yeah, so the first is discover. And this is all about who are you as a church right now? What is your identity according to what people say about your church, what the numbers say about your church, tell me about the church you are, not the church, because the temptation is that the church is always in someone's memory rather than what it really is. So the first one's discovering who are we, who are we trying to reach?
Right.
Then the next step, discern. Okay, we're sort of identifying who we're trying to reach. What do we know about them? Mm-hmm. How can we get to know them in such a way that we could start to discern how God wants us to translate the gospel into their lives? And that's that's a listening process. That's a conversational process.
Mhm.
That's a reading resources process to try to get to know. Because the thing is, we always assume we know who we're trying to reach, and this is taking the step to make sure we actually know them as best we can.
Yeah.
Then the third is to decide. Okay,
Mhm.
now that we've discovered and we've discerned, what are we going to decide to do in the next 3, 6, 12, 18 months?
Mhm.
What are the key areas, the key result areas that we think are going to help move the mission forward
Mm.
and translate the gospel to these different generations or whomever we're trying to reach? And then lastly, to deploy. It's one thing to decide, but churches are notorious for deciding a whole bunch of things that never get done.
Mm.
So how do we make sure we put a good, actionable, time-stamped plan together so that we have a shot of getting things actually completed? So the 4Ds, it's just a process that any church of any size in any state can follow and hopefully help to lead some change.
Yeah, I love it. And last time we walked through Discover in a little more detail and really thinking about who are you and who are you trying to reach, and that kind of those two questions put together. And so, without going into everything that we talked about, what are a couple key things that we would want to keep in mind as we move into this next part of the conversation? Anything that we want to kind of bring back to the front of our mind?
The thing that I'll say is, so I'll give an example from my church that I'm at now here at Tower Hill. So when I arrived here, this is how Tower Hill was described to me. We are a church that is known for its traditional music program, in particular, its youth bell program that has played all over the world and once played at the White House and was led by legendary Bob Ivy, who was a huge mover and shaker in bell land. And he was here. He was on staff here. So there's a big legacy, and that's who we are. And therefore, as you look at the church around us, then the answer to the question, how do we reach people, is to continue being who we are. The problem with that was it's not who the church was anymore. That was the church of people's memory of 20 years before.
Right.
And it was still operating as if that were the main vehicle to reaching people with the gospel. And it sucked up resources and energy and time. Not that it was a bad thing. In a lot of ways, it was a good thing, but it wasn't really who the church was or who they needed to become in order to reach younger.
Yeah.
And that was really hard for people to swallow or understand until they sort of could see the current picture of who the church is. How many young families they have, how many kids are even in the Bell program, and how much. Do you see what I'm saying? It's really hard. You can't address what you're unwilling to acknowledge.
Yeah.
And so a lot of churches will sort of just assume they kind of know who they are and want to skip ahead to what's the next shiny new cool thing that's going to attract people. And the answer may be, based on who you are, that's not the thing you should do at all. So you just want to make sure that it's like you're not going to get a good prescription if you don't have the accurate diagnosis.
Yeah, I think you said something like, if you don't know who you are, the next steps are going to be really difficult to determine.
Yeah.
And I think what I hear you saying here too is that if you are thinking of yourself as of who you are, but that is the church of 20 years ago, it's going to be really hard to get traction on next steps too. So who are you now? What's your life like now? And what would people say about your church now? And what would you say about your church? And some of those really helpful questions. So knowing who you are, and then beginning to dream and think and to ask God to put someone on your heart. Who are you trying to reach? Yeah. And how are you going to, then you can begin to get a picture of some things that we're going to talk about today in the discern phase. But before we get into that, somebody might be going, I think I know who we are as a church, and I think I know who we're trying to reach. Why is it important not to skip this part of the process?
Because that's a great question, because that's the temptation. Everyone wants to skip over that. Okay, just get to the real stuff that's going to fix things.
Real stuff.
Without a real robust understanding of who you are and where you've been, it's going to be really hard to know where you're supposed to go.
Yeah.
Because you really have no sense of location. You have no sense of where you are on this map between here and there. And the only way to do that is to really kind of do a nice self-assessment or
Mhm.
self-examination. And I know that mentioned this last week, a lot of pastors and churches don't like this because it's uncomfortable. They're afraid they're going to find things that reflect poorly on their leadership.
Sure.
And I just, I understand that, but honestly, some of the best things come from that accurate diagnosis. In fact,
Yeah.
when you really know who you are, it makes your potential for reaching others so much more
Absolutely.
because you know exactly where
Yeah.
you're lacking and where you need to grow.
Oh, that's so good. And I think what else is in here is when you know where you are, you also get to see the good things, the things that are working.
Yes, it's not all bad.
It's not all bad stuff. That's, I think, the fear part of us goes,
Yeah.
this is going to be bad. It's going to be my sermon's fault. It's going to be my leadership's fault. It's going to be something. But no. We're looking at who we are, how we're gifted, what do we have to offer that God can put to use, and have that picture. And if you think about it, what came to mind as you're talking about that is, if you have a trail map in front of you and you're like, I don't know whether I should go left or right or up or down because I don't know where I am on this map. Like, if you don't know where you are, you don't know where to go. You couldn't know where to go next. You'll just be guessing. So there's a reason why that star exists on a trail map out somewhere, right? It says,
Yeah.
and you know what it says right next to it?
Exactly. You are here.
This is where you are. So now you go, oh, okay. And facing this direction, now I can begin to navigate again. So I love this. Discover, don't skip that step. Take time to discern where you've been, where you are now, and who God has made you to be. And potentially, as part of that, who are you trying to reach? And that's where the discerning begins to kind of go to that next step or that next level. So let's talk about the discern phase of this process. And what do we mean by that? What did you mean by that? And one of the lines that I saw there was discern, placing your finger on the pulse of those you're trying to reach. What do you mean by that? What does it mean to put a finger on the pulse?
Yeah, so it's really making sure that you understand, if I'm trying to reach somebody, do I even know what it is that keeps them up at night? Do I know what their hopes and dreams are, or their pain points, or their baggage with church, or their relationship with scripture, or how they see church in culture? If I don't know any of that, it's really hard to know how to bring the gospel to bear in their context. I have to know their context. It's exactly like Wycliffe Bible translators.
Yeah.
When they go to translate the Bible into a new language, they never just start translating out of nowhere. They learn the language and then they live with them so that they can get to know the culture. And there's kind of some famous stories about how whenever that's gone wrong and they accidentally turn scripture into, on its head.
Yeah.
And they spend sometimes years before they ever start to translate. And this is really what that's about. It's listening and understanding who you're trying to reach so that you could bring the gospel into their lives in a meaningful way. Yeah,
I love that. And so when we're talking about listening, you're talking about active listening in two directions, and some of that. How do we listen to the people we're trying to reach? What are some things that we might be doing to
So let's say, for example, and in the book, I assume most are trying to reach young families.
Sure.
So I kind of run with young families, even though this process will work for whomever you're trying to reach. You might be in a retirement community and you need to reach retirees. You need to, or maybe you live in a community that's multi-ethnic and you want to reach a new ethnic group outside of your own. There's all sorts of possibilities for this, but let's assume I'm trying to reach young families. It's like, how do we become journalists? How do we talk to and build relationships with those young families in such a way that we ask questions? Why don't you currently go to church? Or why did you decide to attend church? And part of it's just talking to people and asking them direct questions. And it's the funny thing is we don't do that. That's like one of the last things we do, I think, because we're afraid.
Yeah.
But one of the best research experiments is, if you don't have any young families in your church, ask your congregation to ask their grandkids or their kids or talk with family and just start asking questions. what are you most concerned about as a family? Or what do you hope for your kids? Or what are you most excited about regarding your family? Or
Mm-hmm.
if you did go to church, what would you be looking for? Or what would keep you there?
Mm-hmm.
Or if you already do go to church, what about that church attracted you? Why do you still go there? How is it helping your life? And you start to build an understanding of who you're trying to reach that shapes how you reach them.
Yeah. So you get some just, you start reaching out for relationship in the various ways that you can to kind of be curious about and have a posture of active listening, asking questions instead of having all the answers, right? Just being curious about learning about that generation. And you also point to some really great resources. I mean, there's a bunch of research out on younger generations and all those kinds of things. And those all show up in the book too. So you can go to the generation itself. You can go find great data about different generations and the people you're trying to reach, as well as kind of anecdotal relational conversations that can help shape how you understand them. You're taking the pulse of that group and getting to know their heart. And you talk about getting to know their pain points and getting to know kind of the things that make them tick. And I love that picture of the Wycliffe Bible translation, because it is idiomatic, right? It is the language of the people. It's not just the literal translation of the words. It's understanding that. One of my favorite translations of the Bible, I don't know if it was Wycliffe or not, but is the Pigeon Bible. I don't know if you know the Jesus book. Oh, so good. I was like, this is brilliant. But that must have taken somebody who either was in that culture or embedded themselves in that culture to really understand how to say these things in a way that makes sense. And it probably took a lot of curiosity and learning along the way.
And I just want to say about the resources, I would just want to give an example of how we're doing this right now in real time.
Yeah.
So we're continuing to try to improve our reach to young adults, particularly single young professionals between 25 and 30. There's a gap there for us. We have them in our orbit, but we don't really know what to do with them. So we're having conversations. And I'll give an example. So some of the Barna research on Gen Z that says things like, young men are gravitating toward more traditional, they're coming back to church, and they're attracted to Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches, more tradition. Is that true? So on and so forth. And yet Gen Z women are attending church less often. And so what I'll do is when I sit down and talk with some of these young professionals, I'll just ask them straight up, hey, there's some research out there that says this. What do you think that's true? Like, what do you see? And then you can kind of blend what you're reading about and get actual perspective from your target audience.
Yeah, I like that.
And just sort of think, okay, does this research seem true for our context based on these conversations I'm having? And then that will really give you a good idea of how to reach the people you're trying to reach. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah, I love that. And there's a couple other things you mentioned in this section. One is about theological vision. And I want to talk about that because that's come up a lot of times here on our podcast, developing a theological vision. So when we're talking about that kind of comes out of Tim Keller land, Center Church. Just high level, what do we mean by something like a theological vision?
Yeah, Tim Keller is really the genius behind this language that we used back in 2013 when we started initiating this process in our church. And he says, in the world of computers, there's hardware, the computer, and there's software, that runs whatever program that we want to run. But he said, he says this in Center Church. He talks about, but there's this other thing he didn't know that existed called middleware. And it's the middleware in a computer that does the translation between the hardware and the software so the software can work. He said the theological vision is like the middleware of your church. You have your beliefs, you have your systems, you have your structure, you have your hardware, and then you have a whole bunch of different programs you can run, but without that middleware, they can't talk to each other properly. So you need something that helps you understand that the translative something to understand how exactly we build that bridge from who we are to who we're trying to reach. And developing a theological vision is simply saying, how do we bring the gospel to bear in this particular time and place for these particular people.
I love it. Yeah. So just even having that conversation and going, trying to wrestle with that and listen around that. Even what are the ideas that we have? What are we discerning? What are we learning about the people we're trying to reach, so that we can begin to have some answers to that question. And then one last point that you put in here I thought was really good. I used the example from Dances with Wolves. And I think somewhere along there, if I remember right, you were talking about how we need to be patient and slow down when it comes to speaking someone else's language or learning kind of to translate into that other language. And so at first, when you said slow down, I thought you were talking about the length of the movie, because I think it's like 4 hours long, which
right.
It is. It's a long movie. But tell us what you meant by that, as he was trying to learn the language of the native people that he was encountering there.
Yeah, if you guys remember the film, John Dunbar, Kevin Costner is trying to communicate with the medicine man, or the man of importance in the Native American tribe, and they can't understand each other, and so it's a very slow word exchange, teaching one another their language, and they're so frustrated, and it's frustrating to watch.
Yeah.
Even in the movie, it's frustrating because you just want them to communicate. You get the sense that they're both good people and they have this desire to communicate, but they just can't. And it's just slow going and painful. But they both stick with it. And in the end, that's exactly what saves the tribe. And, church revitalization is like this. It's hard. It's a grind. And the translation, it's clunky and it takes longer than you want it to. But if you stick with it, that could be what saves the tribe. That could be what actually changes things. In fact, I believe that is what will. It's a consistency over time, and the unwillingness to give up.
Yeah. So I've noticed a pattern now. And we'll see if it continues the rest of the story here. But that at the end of the beginning discover process, listen, you can't skip that. You got to do that work and dive into that and really understand who you are and who is God putting on your heart to reach, getting clear about that. And then here in the discern phase, we're listening, we're learning, we're beginning to understand the language of another generation or a group that we're trying to reach. And we can't rush that process either. So Jason, I want to make some progress, man. Let's go. But, actually, isn't this true to our experience in the church? It is the long, faithful road. It is the slow work of discernment and understanding and beginning to move in directions. And like we started the year with that idea of compounding decisions, it's going to add up over time to something good. You are making progress. Any forward movement is progress. So celebrate what you are learning and what you are figuring out and what God is doing and celebrate that, but also don't get impatient if it feels like it's hard work, because it is.
Yeah. And I will say this, there is a snowball effect. And so what takes this first part always takes longer. But once you really get dialed in, it becomes faster. And easier. It really does, because you've kind of gotten rid of all of that sideways energy of what are we going to do? I don't know. What are we going to figure out? And now it's a lot of forward energy as to, okay, now we know exactly who we're trying to reach, exactly who we are. Here's some ideas of what we're going to do. And then things start stacking up.
Nice.
And it's the cool thing is that as you go and you successfully do reach those you're trying to reach, your other targets are going to come up, if you will. You're going to be like, oh, you know what? We also should be reaching these people. Let's do this process again. And then you're already better at the process. So that's going to go faster.
Well, you've kind of seen it in action. You go, okay, this is what it looks like. This is what we're going to do. And hey, you've already done the hard work of discovering who you are, right? So you get to bring that into the equation too. So you've done that. You've discovered, you've discerned, you've learned about those you're trying to reach, and you become a resident alien. I like that term that you include in there. Just kind of getting to know the culture and what makes that group tick that you're trying to reach. And then the next phase in this discern time is to start to close the gap.
Yeah.
And so that's where we begin to make some progress, or maybe what feels like progress, from where we are and what we've learned to now what are we going to do to move in the direction of our hopes for that group or those people. So let's talk about a little bit about this, where this shows up. And you provided 4 areas in your book, and I'm sure there's others that we could think of, but kind of 4 big categories where we want to start to close the gap from where we are, who we are, to who we're trying to reach. And the first one is worship. So let's just talk about this. I don't think it's quite as sensitive of a topic as it once was, Jason, but I mean, this used to be like, I dare you to raise this topic kind of thing back in the worship war days. But why is worship? Why did you start with worship as an area to close the gap?
Yeah, I think worship is practically, it's the biggest opportunity for everybody in the orbit of your church to gather and to bring their praise to God, or even to investigate who God is. It sort of attracts everyone from pre-Christian sometimes to faithful disciple who's been walking with Jesus their whole lives. And there is something about the genuine, heartfelt, all-out worship of God that is attractive to those who don't know God. It can be repulsive for sure, because it's might feel weird, but genuinely, like, that heartfelt worship of God, when people are really all in, it does something to the non-believer. I think there's a curiosity, there's a wooing of the Spirit that God does through that. But worship, because the way that I see it is very practical too. It's like, if you're going to spend your time making sure something is really thoughtful and dialed in, worship's probably the best use of your time. And I don't mean like, you could have all sorts of different worship that's glorifying to God. So let's just put that out there. But I think, how do we make sure it's glorifying to God and it meets people where they at, so that they can fully let go of whatever they're holding on to and give their glory to God? So worship, I think, is a great way to start.
Yeah. So when you're thinking about worship, now you know who you are, you know who you're trying to reach, and you want to close the gap, and you've listened. How do we practically begin to think about what we do in worship? I mean, we both walked through a lot of these challenges, and we've actually spent quite a lot of time talking about that here on the podcast over the years. But maybe a couple high-level thoughts on what do we do with our worship? If we're thinking in terms of younger families or next generations, are there some things that we need to be paying attention to?
Yeah, I think just pay attention to how, so let's say you're trying to reach young families. You need to start asking questions like, is this worship style prohibiting or promoting their ability to worship God? Now, here's where it gets tricky, because on some level, there is a latent consumerism that gets in there, and it can get really ugly and not very glorifying to God. But if we're being honest, worship is performative on some level. In other words, when somebody goes up and reads the scripture, if I can't hear them or understand them, that doesn't really help me worship God. In fact, it does the opposite. Often is it will distract me from being in the moment worshiping God, and I'll start worrying about the person doing the reading.
That's right.
Or if the singing is completely tone deaf, I'm not going to be able to focus. And I wish that weren't true, but it just is. So on some level, it has a performative aspect that doesn't make it any less worshipful. In fact, I would argue the other way. It helps open people up with a certain level of comfort in the worship service to really let go and give their praise to God. So I think that's one thing that I would look at. And the other thing is just paying attention to the energy of the worship service. I find, again, I don't want this to sound disparaging in any way, but I find that a lot of worship services are sort of emotionally flat. Everything's at the same volume, if you will. The readings, the speaking, the message, the singing is all kind of emotionally like a line, like a straight line. And what happens is people just tune out. Even liturgy becomes rote really quickly. I could say the Lord's Prayer and I could say the Apostles' Creed. It's something in our traditional service we do every week. But it's really easy to tune out and say the words without feeling it in our hearts. And part of that's an emotion thing. We are We are intellectual, spiritual, and emotional beings.
Mhm.
Now, again, there's a line there. You want to make sure you're not manipulating emotions. That's not what we're after. But how do we engage head, heart, soul
Yeah.
in the worship
That's
experience?
right. Yeah. So
Yeah.
even whether it's traditional or contemporary or
Yeah,
whatever,
the style
what is
doesn't matter.
the flow of the service that keeps people leaned in and engaged with what's going on? And I think there's a lot of elements of that, right? Technology, is it fading into the background, or is it clunky in a way that draws attention to itself? You know, we had some issues with my microphone the last handful of weeks, to the point where people have asked about it after the service. And finally, I was just like, we have to fix this. Like it's become a distraction, right? Or you think about I don't know, it was a number of weeks ago, but our sound guy was kind of newer to the team, and he was a little shy about filling the room with the volume. Like we said, no, we want this decibel. We have a decibel reader in the back of our sanctuary because it's tough to be the sound guy. But the sound volume was down to the point where I could hear people singing, and one was singing really badly out of key at the top of their lungs. And it was like everybody was turning to look and trying not to look. And so all those things, if we're trying to create an environment for people to connect their heart to God's heart and to be in worship, what are the things that are going to help make that happen? And what's the arc of the service? And, and thinking in those kinds of terms. And, we've had a lot of those conversations here about some of that related to sermons and the order of service and things like that. But I'm glad that you mentioned this on the front end. Here's one that we can do something about based on what we're discerning about this community we're trying to reach. And what are some things we want to try in this arena? And that'll get us into some of the decide stuff a little bit later on. But
absolutely.
Yeah.
And this is where the book and there's sort of a lot to cover. So it's okay if we just kind of hit it at a high level.
Mhm,
But this is where the book sort of slows down in a very intentional way. And we stay in this discern process for a while, because you have to really wrestle this stuff to the ground before you hit the decide. Okay, this is what we're going to do. So, we cover these areas. Worship is one. Worship, next gen, evangelism, and adult discipleship.
Right. Yeah.
There are plenty of other things, but those are four big ones, especially if you don't know where to start. Just picking one of those is a great exercise in trying to think, okay, who's our target demographic? Let's say we are trying to reach, retirees in our community. Okay, how is our worship helping them, speaking their language?
That's right. Yeah.
And with the language of the gospel. Well, it does this well, it does this badly. We have 25 minutes of announcements, everyone falls asleep, or
That's right.
you know what I mean? Or we try to do a guitar song and it
people are asking for earplugs. Yeah,
exactly right. Like, what is it that we're doing that's engaging them at their level?
Yeah, I love that. That's really good. Yeah. So I think, I was tempted to get into the weeds of each of these, but we're not going to fall into that temptation because it's all right there in the book.
It's all in the way.
It's really good. And there's always, like I said, we've talked about these things, but there's so much to say. And so I just, again, commend that to you. But kind of at a high level, one thing that you can kind of poke at is your worship service and trying to see it through the eyes of the people you're trying to reach and speaking their language. And then the second one that you mentioned is next gen. And maybe we'll land with this and then come back to the other two next time. But next gen, when we're talking about this as an area of exploration, what's so important about this one? Is it because they're young and we need the young people to come to church so that we can pass the baton? What is it about this next gen that is an area of focus in this discern phase?
Well, people come to church in a minivan or an SUV. And the idea is that you have several generations in a young family. And you need to think about, how are we speaking Jesus to them at their level? And something that often gets ignored in churches is, how are we helping the kids to know and love Jesus Christ? Particularly if they are in a Sunday school hour. How do we make sure that we are treating that as the evangelism opportunity that it is? And how are we making sure that think about kids? Kids nowadays, have you been to your kids' school in the last 10 years? I mean, it is nothing like when we were growing up in school.
Mm-mm.
I mean, I grew up in school, and it was, I'm slightly older than you, Jesse, but we're sitting in our own individual desks in neat rows, lecture style, all day long.
Mm-hmm.
Today, my kids grew up, they had smart boards, they sat in cohorts in groups of desks that
Mm-hmm.
faced each other using Chromebooks, no tech. I mean, it's all completely different.
That's right.
And one struggle that we had as a church early on was that we were still running Sunday school as if it were the old 1950s lecture
Mm-hmm.
model. And we were wondering why kids hated it and they didn't want to come and they weren't engaged. And so obviously they were also not growing in their faith.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the big things was, well, how do we rethink this?
Mm-hmm.
And then what happened was the kids loved it so much, not just because it was entertaining. I mean, they were really growing in their faiths, but because it was speaking their language. And then they brought their parents to church.
Mm-hmm.
We have to think about, again, kids ministry or next gen ministry on a Sunday morning in particular can't be an afterthought.
Yeah.
It is just as important as the worship service itself.
Yeah.
So how do we make sure that we are pouring the right resources into that?
Yeah.
Next gen is huge.
Yeah. I love it.
If we're not handing our faith off to the next generation, what the heck are we doing?
Yeah, that's right. Well, you said in there somewhere along the way, I think you said Jesus isn't the problem, right? It's like, it's the way that we're presenting Jesus, or some of the ways that maybe we're stuck in. And I do think flannel graph will be back at some point, Jason, just FYI. But yeah, old will be new again. But are we thinking in terms of what's going to reach these young people, or these kids and these youth that God has entrusted to us, or that we hope become a part of our life? What are we going to do to meet them where they are with the gospel in a way that speaks their language and helps them to understand? We think about it all the way from the nursery on up.
Yeah.
What's the gospel for a 2-year-old?
Yeah.
It's not, Jesus' blood was shed on it's like, no, there are people here who love you and God loves you. If that's all they ever get from the nursery, that's what we hope for, right? And then you go to preschool, and what can they know? God loves you. He wants to be your friend, and Jesus loves you. And here's the beginnings of the story, right? So thinking in terms of how do we speak the language of that next generation coming up, and in a way that we're able to translate the gospel into their lives, and trust that God's going to take that and use that for his purpose. So I love it. So we're thinking discerning, not only who are we and who we're trying to reach, but who are they and what makes them tick and what's their language and what are they all about, and all that, in such a way that now we can begin to identify kind of key areas of our life to bring those questions and our learning into, and begin to explore some possibilities there. So really good stuff, Jason. Okay. We're going to pause there because we're already a long ways into this episode, and it's all really good stuff. But any kind of final summary thoughts or anything about discover, discern that you want to throw into the mix before we sign off for today?
Yeah, I just want to say the discover and the discern process take the longest.
Yeah.
But once you get through it, the rest comes together pretty quickly. So be encouraged. Again,
That's right.
You have to wade in it and really absorb it and let it marinate, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So that when it comes time to think about, okay, what are we going to try? What are we going to do to try to change things?
Mm-hmm.
You're really well informed, and you're kind of living and breathing it.
In some ways, in my experience, and I think you've had this too, it almost comes spilling out.
It
right?
does.
It's like, oh, of course, this is what we should try. Or, oh, yes. And then, there is a clarity that can happen because of the hard work that you're doing in these two sections. So really good stuff. We're going to get back to it. And what I hear you saying is these next 2 episodes will be half as long. So we'll see.
Actually, yes.
Yeah, probably so. Anyway, looking forward to more on Decide and Deploy. And thanks for just kind of walking us through this, Jason. And of course, if you want to reach out and grab that book, Speaking Their Language by Jason Tucker, you can find that out there on Amazon and other places. Just grateful that you were able to put a resource like this out there for us. So thanks for your good work.
Yeah, it's fun, when you take a long time and you work on something like this, that it's exciting and a little bit scary, right? It's going out into the world with your name on it. But I really do hope it's helpful to a lot of churches. So it's and quick thing, I know pastors like to save money. It's at a discounted rate while the pre-sale is going on. But then once it hits February 3rd, It'll be at the regular rate everywhere you buy books, Amazon, all that stuff. So anyway, thank you, Jesse. Thanks for this opportunity to talk about it. It's really fun and cool to get to do this. So I hope it's helpful, everyone, and reach out to us anytime, Jason or Jesse at reclaimleader.com. We love talking to you. We love being part of the conversation together, because that's what this is all about. How do we help each other keep doing ministry and lead healthy churches? So we'll end like we always do. Ministry is hard. It is so much better when we do it together. Take care, everyone.